one company's role during a crucial decade of our nation's history. It is a story of industrial potential, of new and unprecedented weapons, of design ingenuity and production resourcefulness, of men and women determined to safeguard their nation's future. More than this, it is a documentation and research, of exploration into new and revolutionary fields, for this is an aviation story. Our story begins in 1935. A new aircraft company is formed by men whose background has been aviation. A small building houses both office shops. Equipment is installed. The first contract is obtained. It is for the experimental installation of the first liquid-cooled Allison engine in an Army A-11 fighter. Contract number 2 is for production work, also of a military nature, and with its organization a going concern, the company turns to its originally announced purpose, the design of military aircraft intended to give new strength to the air forces of the United States. First of these was a new type of airplane weapon, a new concept of fighter aircraft. Incorporating many features later accepted by the air forces for fighters and bombers, this was the XFM Airacobra. Long range, one of the fastest aircraft of its day, the Airacobra carried a supply of light bombs and mounted 6 guns. With its pusher-type propellers giving its forward gunners a free field of fire, it had unprecedented destructive power for fighter aircraft. It first flew September 1st, 1937. Meanwhile, company engineers were working on other designs, and soon Bell proposed a new fighter which in World War II was to serve in almost every theater of combat. This was the cannon on wings, the P-39 Airacobra sky platform for heavy artillery. Its 37-millimeter cannon was but one of its many unusual features. For the first time, the engine was mounted behind the pilot and connected to the propeller by a drive shaft, ability over the nose. Company engineered the P-39. It was the first new tricycle landing gear later to become standard on many aircraft, including all of Bell's fighters. First production model of the P-39 was delivered in October 1940, clearing the way for large-scale manufacture of this fighter at a time when our allies of the future were calling for planes to help stem the German tide in Europe. The company turned to mass production using the latest methods known to the industry to help meet the call for more and more planes. Assembly operations were broken down into simple steps so the training of workers would be limited to single specific jobs. Lofting, to a greater extent than ever before attempted, helped to ensure accuracy of the various assemblies. Bell personnel devised new and intricate machines and equipment to help speed the work. Some 12,000 ideas were submitted and nearly 2,500 accepted and used. For example, here are shown the outgrowth of 2 of these ideas, the pantograph router, in which templates serve as exact patterns for every part of the airplane, and the spar milling machine, both labor-saving, production-increasing machines. Airplanes were assembled and flight tested at the Buffalo Airport, but by the winter of 1939 and spring of 1940, it became apparent that it would be necessary to expand the company's facilities. Plans were drawn for a new assembly plant on a site adjacent to the Niagara Falls Municipal Airport, selected so that highly necessary flight testing by Army, as well as company pilots, and flyaway deliveries could be expedited. This was the first plant to be built as part of the National Defense Program, and by the spring of 1941, before construction work was completed, workers were moved into the plant and the first new assembly line set up. With its enlarged facilities, Bell Aircraft Corporation was now equipped to produce P-39 fighter planes on a greatly increased scale. They were delivered to the Royal Air Forces, then attempting to defend Britain against the attacks of the German Luftwaffe, and to the United States Army. At Selfridge Field, Michigan, the first Airacobra fighter squadrons were formed. These and other squadrons underwent strenuous training in using the heavy armament and high speed of these new aircraft weapons. Full-scale combat maneuvers intensified the nation's preparedness program as it became increasingly evident that the war in Europe might engulf the entire world. Pearl Harbor, the United States at war, calling for more and more aircraft. The already high rate of Airacobra production necessarily intensified. Hundreds were immediately sent to the Pacific, others to other fronts. Iceland, A P-39 Airacobra, the first United States plane to knock down a German plane after our entry into combat. Guadalcanal, Kiska, New Guinea, England, Faid Pass, Panama, Russia, and the Mediterranean. Tropics, Arctic, desert, mud, these were the bases of the Airacobra. Equipped with a medium-altitude engine, the P-39 carried out its mission, fighting, strafing, blasting shipping, knocking out tanks, and then was called upon and gave more, fighting at all combat altitudes against tremendous odds under all conditions. They helped turn the German hordes from Stalingrad. Alexander Prokryshkin, top Allied ace and the only three-time hero of the Soviet Union, shot down 48 Nazi planes while flying an Airacobra. He and 9 other Russian aces blasted 294 Germans from the sky with the cannon and guns of the P-39. For the most part, the Bell planes that were sent to Russia on the orders of our government went by air, flying the long route from the Niagara Falls airport through Alaska and Siberia directly to the Russian front, the longest route of the war for a fighter plane. Meanwhile, with this nation's need for aerial weapons and other articles of war constantly increasing, Bell continued its expansion in general with other aircraft companies and manufacturers of materials for the armed forces of the United States and its allies. Extensive additions were made to the assembly plant near Niagara Falls, increasing factory space and airport facilities. A new unit housing the company's large engineering staff was built. In keeping with the production program of the nation, workers were placed on a 7-day, 3-shift work week. Thousands of women were hired and trained for production line work. The company accepted contracts to manufacture sub-assemblies for other aircraft producers, meanwhile keeping apace with schedules for its own airplanes. An ordnance division grown out of a recoil device developed by the company during construction of the Airacobra was supplying American bombers and naval vessels with gun mounts and other armament equipment made necessary by the sudden advent of war. In addition, at the request of the War Department shortly after Pearl Harbor, the Bell Company became a prime contractor in the largest production program for a single war weapon ever conceived, the manufacture of B-29 Super Fortress bombers, at that time still in the blueprint stage. Production facilities were expanded from the 40,000 feet leased in 1935 to more than 8 million square feet in full wartime operation. Employment eventually soared to a company high of more than 50,000 men and women, multiplying its January 1940 level 42 times. The hiring of thousands upon thousands of men and women, the vast majority of whom were unskilled, necessitated setting up a huge training program to teach them to turn out aircraft and ordnance swiftly and efficiently. Production workers were given in-plant training, taught new methods of manufacture by motion pictures, and still photographs produced in the company's own motion picture and photographic departments. A total of 77,000 employees received extensive training during the war years. Morale measures were given strict attention in keeping with efforts to obtain and maintain high production. Bell management and supervision held mass meetings of workers on innumerable occasions at all plants to keep them informed on details of administration and operation. Employees assembled by the thousands time and again to get additional information on methods of stimulating production. Workers also were kept informed of various phases of company activity by a monthly magazine. Each plant had its own newspaper. Newsreels from the War Department and other government agencies helped to give employees an overall picture of their role in the war. The company had necessary facilities in all plants to help employees with housing, share the ride plans, rationing, and other problems that might otherwise have distracted their attention from their work. All company facilities made provisions to supply hot, wholesome food to employees, and in 1944 alone, more than 12 million persons were served in company cafeterias. Many hotel chains served far less. War bond rallies brought famous show people, Al Jolson, Walter Abel, Gil Lamb, Franchot Tone, and Misha Auer were among those who entertained Bell workers. Bell personnel were quick to respond to these appeals for monies to help wage the war of the United States, and in the course of the conflict subscribed nearly $37,700,000, winning for every Bell plant the coveted Treasury T Award. Community groups bought Bell planes by earmarking war bond purchases, and many battlefronts saw these fighters bearing the names of the schools or civic organizations which christened them before their departure over the long route to combat. Family days were arranged by the company with the cooperation of the War Department so that the families of the workers could have better knowledge and thus greater interest in the work their husbands, daughters, sons, and wives were doing in the war effort. In all, some 200,000 workers and their guests visited company facilities on these special family days. In addition to training production workers, the company engaged in the training of large numbers of field service men who were to go to those corners of the earth where Bell planes were in service. The company's service division prepared maintenance manuals for use by Army mechanics, and a special service school provided training for some 1,300 service representatives and other personnel. These representatives were stationed in every part of the world where P-39s and other Bell planes were used. At times, it was necessary for them to recruit inexperienced help to work under their supervision. At others, they served as advisors for Army ground crews in servicing Bell aircraft. In the Pacific, in the Aleutians, in nearly every part of the globe, these field service men met and worked with Army mechanics who were also Bell trained. These soldier mechanics were part of the 7,432 men graduated from Camp Bell, operated by the Bell Company for the Army. With production of P-39s constantly increasing, the training command requested the company to set up facilities to train soldier mechanics who could service the airplanes in the field. With only 48 hours advance notice of the impending arrival of 500 men, the first contingents of trainees, company personnel leased an historic old hotel in Niagara Falls and set up living quarters and training classes for the group. The number of trainees grew. The hotel became too small to accommodate them properly. A substantial military camp of barracks and classroom hangars was constructed near the Bell plant, adjacent to the Niagara Falls Airport, and named Camp Bell. Classes for the soldier mechanics were operated in 2 shifts, from 8 a.m. until midnight, by Bell service representatives, who by the use of specially prepared manuals, motion and still pictures, duplicate equipment and other means, prepared the men for their future duties in servicing Bell planes. The intensive training course for the individual mechanic lasted 30 days. Bell also operated another facility for the Army near Niagara Falls. This was a large modification center in which more than 7,300 aircraft of all types, foreign as well as American, were prepared for special assignments or were modified to incorporate newly developed improvements. Exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor, a new airplane designed by Bell aircraft engineers had been ground tested and flown for the first time. This was the P63 Kingcobra, a high-altitude, high-performance fighter. With a more powerful engine than its predecessor, the P-39, the Kingcobra was much faster and had a much higher ceiling than the Airacobra. In 1944, a P-63 Kingcobra was rolled off the assembly lines to become the 10,000th fighter plane to be manufactured by Bell Aircraft Corporation, the vast majority in slightly more than 3 years. Like the P-39, the P-63 was supplied to our own air forces and some of our other allies, including Russia, who obtained 7,229 Bell fighters from the United States government under Lend-Lease, more than the entire number of other planes the Soviet obtained from all her allies. The Free French Air Forces were also supplied with P-63s under special arrangement with the War Department, and many Kingcobras bore the tricolor insignia as they were ferried away from the Niagara Falls Airport. These fighter aircraft, nearly 16,000 in all, including 3,000 airplanes and equivalent spare parts, played significant roles on many fronts of World War II, but they constituted only one phase of the war work of the Bell Company. As production of Bell ordnance equipment continued, this division, which was the outgrowth of an important recoil device for 50 caliber machine guns developed by the company in 1938, was built into a large self-contained manufacturing unit. The original device led to the company's development of various types of specialized armament equipment for airplanes. Much of this specialized armament equipment was installed on American bombing planes before we entered the war, and was used on these planes by the British and the French. 350,000 gun mounts, many of them remotely controlled and power operated, were manufactured by the division. The growth of our Ordnance Division was like that of our aircraft plants, and our specialized gun installations became standard equipment on nearly all the important heavy, medium, and light bombers built in America for the armed air forces and allied governments.
Every American bomber carried some item of Bell ordnance equipment. All such equipment was exhaustively tested in a special gun range before delivery to the armed forces and installation on Army B-17s, B-24s, B-26s, B-25s, A-20s, Navy Avengers, PBY flying boats, Mariners, and Bermudas, to mention but a few of the planes that carried the many products of Bell's Ordnance Division. In addition to the aircraft that carried this armament equipment, subchasers and PT boats as well used it. The United States Navy also equipped many of its tactical airplanes with specialized bomb release mechanisms manufactured by the company. With the increasing growth of the Ordnance Division and because of the critical manpower situation in the Buffalo area, Bell moved this operation to Burlington, Vermont in late 1943. As the war progressed and the requirements for the necessary types of equipment manufactured were filled, the Ordnance Division successfully changed its emphasis and by the latter phases of the war was engaged in the manufacture of parts for B-29 superfortresses and the production of special types of equipment and shells for the Chemical Warfare Service. Far to the south in Marietta, Georgia, Bell was building B-29s. Because the labor market varied widely in different parts of the country, the Army had selected this site near Atlanta where no manpower shortage existed. Building was started in March 1942 and the Bell Company took over occupancy of the still uncompleted plant in April of 1943. 8 months later in December, the company delivered the first 2 Georgia-built B-29s to the Army Air Forces on schedule. With the air strategy in the Pacific premised to a great degree on the long range of these aircraft, their production in large quantities and as fast as possible was the goal of the Bell Aircraft Corporation and the other prime contractors participating in the B-29 program. Using assembly line production methods and the high degree of lofting, which the company had used to produce fighter planes, manufacturing of superfortresses was increased so that Bell production at VJ Day was running over 60 per month, or 50% more than the 40 per month originally contemplated for this facility. And these were planes produced in a facility using, at its peak, 30,000 employees, largely recruited from an area previously without skilled workers of any kind, but who were trained under the direction of Bell personnel from its other manufacturing units. The first Bell-built superfortress, named the Georgia Peach, took part in the original B-29 raid over Tokyo. Others followed by the score, by the hundreds, for by the end of the war, Bell manufactured and delivered a total of 663 B-29s, an average of over 1 a day from the time production began in December 1943 until hostilities ceased. All 663 B-29s from this plant in Marietta, Georgia, were flight tested by Bell crews, flight tested by Army crews, and delivered to their destinations by ferry pilots without a single accident. On the basis of its production and other accomplishments of its personnel, the company received many awards from government agencies throughout the course of the war. All divisions were presented the Treasury T Award for war bond subscriptions. The Army and Navy E Award was awarded to the corporation, and the Army and Navy E pennant, which flew over the main offices near Niagara Falls, bore 4 stars, indicative of additional commendations for production. Camp Bell, where the company operated its training program of soldier mechanics for the Army, received the Army Air Force's Technical Training Command Efficiency Banner and the Certificate of Service Award from the Army Air Forces. Class A, the highest Army rating on all inspection, was received repeatedly. Bell operations, production, and the experimental work constantly being carried forward by its engineers brought many visitors to the various plants. Among these was the late President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who came to Bell in November 1940 to inspect the manufacturing methods and products of the company, and later addressed the employees on the necessity of their work. Other visitors who inspected the plant were General H.H. Arnold, Commanding General of the Army Air Forces, Director of the Defense Program William S. Knudsen, and Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt. There were many visitors from other countries. From the Latin Americas came President Batista of Cuba, President Del Rio of Ecuador, President Penaranda of Bolivia, President Morganigo of Paraguay, General Tavarius of Chile, Dr. Para Perez of Venezuela, Louis Mercier of Haiti, and an entire mission from Brazil. King Peter of Yugoslavia also visited the company.
From Russia came Generals Berezin, Ozevich, and Petrov, and aviation engineers Major Sukrun and Colonel Kochetkov. From France, there was General Ziegler, Captain Amory Ali, Colonel Ledouce, Colonel Rozanoff, and others. From nearby Canada came various guests, including Air Vice Marshal Stedman. Other visitors included the then Undersecretary of War, Robert Patterson, Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Air, Artemus Gates, Secretary of Labor, Francis Perkins, Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, and Thomas E. Dewey, Governor of New York State. President Harry S. Truman and a sizable staff paid an extensive visit to the facilities near the Niagara Falls Airport, carefully inspecting the plant, new products, and the latest experimental aircraft being developed by the company. Among the fighters which the President saw demonstrated was the P-59 Airacobra, which, designed and developed by Bell engineers, had made aviation history as the first jet-propelled airplane in the United States. Shown here in its original test flight at Muroc, California, the P-59 flew for the first time October 1st, 1942, just 1 year after design and development work began. When existence of these airplanes was revealed to the public some 15 months later, the company was working on a production order to be used for training pilots in the use of this new type of aircraft. 2 P-59s were assigned for performance testing to the United States Navy Bureau of Aeronautics, and others went to the RAF in England for similar testing. Meanwhile, Bell designers continued with other experimental work. At the request of the Army, the company designed and built an all-plywood high-speed airplane, the XP-77, the only allied single-place fighter built of wood, which could withstand the strain of aerobatics. Requested by the Air Forces when there was possible danger of enemy attacks on American shores, a shortage of aluminum, other metals and fuels, the XP-77, one of the smallest fighters ever built, was not placed in volume production when it became apparent that the dangers previously considered possible had been averted. Bell also continued its work in the field of jet propulsion, developing a new fighter, the XP-83. The world's longest-range jet-propelled airplane, the high-speed, high-altitude, heavily armored XP-83 utilized improved jet engines which had been developed largely on the basis of performance data on the smaller, less powerful engines of the P-59. To facilitate aircraft research and development and to eliminate hazards to test pilots as airplane speeds began to approach sonic and even supersonic range, Bell engineers devised new methods of radio controlling aircraft and installing television and telemetering equipment to automatically transmit and record flight data. With the newly developed equipment installed on P-59 Aerocomets, company personnel were not only able to take off and land full-size military aircraft from standard runways, but also were able to put them through dive tests, rolls, and other violent aerial maneuvers by remote control, the first time this had ever been accomplished. Later, the company made similar installations on Navy aircraft, and through extensive testing of this new type of equipment, obtained valuable data on the possible and practical use of many future aerial weapons. Another company innovation was the P63 Armored Airplane, devised in cooperation with the Air Technical Service Command and the Training Command to improve aerial gunnery training. Heavily armored with Dural plate and armor glass, the P63 was flown in simulated combat missions against bombers whose gunners blasted at it with specially developed lead and plastic bullets. Although these bullets would be lethal if fired at an unprotected man and actually had enough power to penetrate a dozen inches of pine, they shattered on impact with the P63's armor plate or armor glass. Despite its heavy armor, the P63's performance was quite comparable to that of a standard combat fighter. More than 300 were delivered to the training command. In 1941, Bell Aircraft Corporation became intensely interested in a new form of aerial transportation, rotary wing aircraft, because of the apparent potentialities of the helicopter for military as well as other uses. First experimental aircraft of this type was a single-place helicopter utilizing 2 rotor blades and incorporating many new features, including a special automatic stabilizing device, which greatly facilitated control and increased stability. While this was the first of the Bell modern magic carpets, other models soon followed, were subjected to an intense testing program in conjunction with the company's other military research and development programs. A Bell-built helicopter became the first American aircraft to make an indoor flight when, in the spring of 1944, it flew in a Buffalo armory at a request demonstration for the Civil Air Patrol. The first public appearance of this type of Bell aircraft was made shortly afterward when an experimental model attracted widespread attention in a 4th of July Smokes for Soldiers benefit in the Buffalo Civic Stadium. The following winter, a company pilot flew one of the helicopters on 2 emergency rescue missions. A doctor was flown to the aid of an injured man marooned in a snowbound farmhouse, hours before rescue through the use of any other type of vehicle. Shortly afterwards, in response to an appeal from the United Coast Guard, the same helicopter, in a clear-cut demonstration of stability and control, flew far out over Lake Erie, hovered slightly above the crumbling ice, while 2 fishermen trapped on the rapidly thawing floe clambered aboard, one at a time, and were individually flown to safety. When the helicopter reached them, the men were beyond any other means of rescue and readily admitted they had given themselves up for lost. The success of these missions is only a slight indication of the wide usage to which helicopters can be put. Power line patrol, rescue work, forestry surveys, and crop dusting are but a few of the tasks for which they are uniquely suited. Their development foreshadows a means of air travel which will make the most isolated areas easily accessible. For the helicopter requires no roads, no extensive airport facilities, needs only a landing spot large enough for the turning of its rotor blades. By the end of the war, more than 2,000 flights had been made in Bell helicopters. Some 1,200 passengers have been carried and shown the practicability of these aircraft. They have been shown, too, that the Bell helicopter can land safely by means of auto-rotation in event of an engine failure. By use of special devices, the rotor is disengaged from the power plant in case the engine fails. Hundreds of these landings have been made purposely, assuring the company that they can be accomplished with routine ease. In the years of the war, Bell turned out implements of war: the P-39, P-63, B-29, XP-77, jet-propelled P-59, XP-83, the RP-63, radio-controlled aircraft, gun mounts, mortar shells, incendiary bomb noses, and other weapons and material needed by our troops in combat. Its airframe production in pounds increased from 220,000 pounds in 1940 to an annual rate of 50,700,000 pounds in the last year of the war. With the close of the war, the company continued with military experimental work. Production, however, turned from instruments of conflict, was concentrated on aircraft dedicated to peacetime progress and general welfare. New helicopter models were designed, manufactured, tested, and flown. Their safety features, their practicability, their stability, and flying capabilities have been proven. In helicopters such as this, Bell management is convinced lie new fields of enterprise, a vast new industry. For with its ability to transport men, material, and relief to hitherto inaccessible areas, the helicopter is certain to be an asset to all mankind, truly the magic carpet of modern times.